I was halfway through my morning coffee when I heard the knock that would change my entire relationship with the Meadowbrook Heights homeowners association forever. The woman standing on my porch looked like she had just stepped out of a catalog for overzealous suburban warriors. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled in that signature "Can I speak to the manager" cut, and she wore a pastel pink blazer despite the Arizona heat already climbing toward 90 degrees at 8 in the morning. Her name tag read Brenda Whitfield, HOA president. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound polite despite the interruption. "Can I help you?" Brenda's smile was as artificial as the potted plants flanking my doorway. "Mr. Kendrick, isn't it? Yates Kendrick? I'm Brenda, the president of our wonderful HOA. I wanted to discuss a matter of community responsibility with you." I leaned against the doorframe, already sensing where this might go. I had moved into this Scottsdale neighborhood 3 months ago, and so far, I had managed to avoid most HOA drama. My lawn was kept trim, my house was painted in approved colors, and I parked my car in the garage like a good little homeowner. "Sure," I said. "What's going on?" Brenda gestured toward the house next to mine. "Well, you see, Mrs. Patterson in that house is currently recovering from hip surgery. She's 83 years old, bless her heart, and completely unable to maintain her yard. As her neighbor, I thought you might want to step up and help her out." I glanced at the property she indicated. It was a modest ranch-style home with a yard that, admittedly, looked a bit overgrown. "That's thoughtful of you to think of her," I said carefully. "Is the HOA organizing a volunteer schedule? I'd be happy to help out once or twice." Brenda's smile tightened. "Actually, I was thinking you could handle it weekly. You're right next door, after all. It only makes sense." Something in her tone raised my hackles. "Weekly? That's quite a commitment. Don't you think we should organize something with multiple neighbors?" "I think," Brenda said, her voice taking on an edge, "that as a young, capable man with plenty of time on your hands, you should be more than willing to help an elderly member of our community." I felt my jaw clench. I was 32, worked from home as a software developer, and just because I kept flexible hours didn't mean I had unlimited free time. "With respect, Brenda, I work full-time. I'm happy to contribute, but I can't commit to every week. Maybe we could set up a rotation with other neighbors?" Brenda's expression hardened. "Mr. Kendrick, community spirit is what makes Meadowbrook Heights special. I would hate to think you're not willing to be a team player. You did agree to follow community standards when you purchased your home. Mowing someone else's lawn isn't in the HOA bylaws," I pointed out. "No, but maintaining neighborhood aesthetics is. And Mrs. Patterson's yard is becoming an eyesore. If something isn't done, we'll have to start fining her. I'm trying to prevent that by asking for volunteers." I studied her for a long moment. Something felt off about this entire conversation, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. "Let me think about it," I finally said. "I need to check my schedule." Brenda's lips pursed. "I'll expect to see that lawn mowed by this weekend. Mr. Kendrick, for Mrs. Patterson's sake." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, leaving me standing there with a cold cup of coffee and a growing sense of unease. Later that afternoon, I decided to do what I should have done immediately. I walked over to Mrs. Patterson's house and knocked on her door. After a few minutes, an elderly woman answered, leaning heavily on a walker. "Hello, dear," she said warmly. "Can I help you?" "Hi, Mrs. Patterson. I'm Yates Kendrick from next door. I heard you had surgery recently and wanted to check if you needed any help." Her face lit up. "Oh, how kind. Please, come in." I just made some lemonade. I followed her inside, noting how slowly she moved. The interior of her home was neat and filled with family photos. She gestured for me to sit in the living room while she made her way to the kitchen. "I'm fine on my own, really," she called out. "My daughter comes by twice a week to help with groceries and such. The surgery went well. I should be back on my feet properly in another month or so." "That's great to hear," I said. "I actually wanted to ask you about your yard. Has anyone from the HOA talked to you about it?" Mrs. Patterson returned with 2 glasses of lemonade, moving carefully. "Oh yes, that Brenda woman. She's been quite insistent." She settled into her chair with a small wince. "She keeps telling me I need to hire a landscaping service, but those are so expensive. My fixed income doesn't really allow for that kind of thing." "Has she mentioned organizing neighbors to help?" "She mentioned it once, but then she came back a few days later and said everyone was too busy. She suggested I hire her nephew's landscaping company instead, gave me a quote for $200 a month. I felt my eyebrows rise. $200? That seems steep for a yard this size. That's what I thought, but she said it was the community rate. Mrs. Patterson sighed. I told her I'd have to think about it. My Social Security check doesn't stretch that far, especially with the medical bills. A suspicion was forming in my mind, but I kept my voice neutral. Don't worry about any of that. I'd be happy to help with your yard until you're back on your feet. No charge, of course. Her eyes widened. Oh, I couldn't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. I'm already mowing my own lawn anyway. It's not a big deal to do yours too. Mrs. Patterson's eyes grew misty. You're very kind, young man. Thank you. We chatted for a bit longer, and I learned that she was a retired teacher who had lived in Meadowbrook Heights for over 20 years. She told me the neighborhood had changed a lot in recent years, especially after Brenda took over as HOA president 2 years ago. It used to be such a friendly place, she said wistfully, but now there are so many rules and fines. Poor Mr. Chen down the street got fined $500 because his fence was the wrong shade of white. Can you imagine? I made a mental note to look into the HOA bylaws more carefully. I had skimmed them when buying the house, but clearly, I needed to understand exactly what I had signed up for. That Saturday morning, I mowed both my lawn and Mrs. Patterson's. It took an extra 45 minutes, which was manageable. Mrs. Patterson waved at me from her window, and I waved back, feeling good about helping a neighbor in need. The feeling lasted exactly 3 days. On Tuesday evening, Brenda appeared at my door again. This time, she wasn't alone. 2 other women flanked her, both wearing identical expressions of disapproval. Mr. Kendrick, Brenda said without preamble, I need to speak with you about your expanding responsibilities. My what? I saw you mowed Mrs. Patterson's lawn this weekend. That was very community-minded of you. Her tone suggested it was anything but a compliment. Since you clearly have the time and capability, I'm adding you to our official volunteer landscaping program. I crossed my arms. I don't recall signing up for any program. Brenda pulled out a tablet and tapped at the screen. According to Section 12 of the HOA bylaws, all residents are expected to participate in community enhancement programs when called upon by the board. I'm calling upon you. To do what? Exactly? There are 4 other properties in the neighborhood with residents who are temporarily unable to maintain their yards. I'm assigning you to handle those on a weekly basis. I actually laughed. You're joking. I assure you I am not. Brenda's expression was stone. This is your duty as a member of this community. No, I said flatly. It's not. I volunteered to help Mrs. Patterson because she's my neighbor and she needed help. I'm not a free landscaping service for the entire neighborhood. One of the women behind Brenda spoke up. This is exactly the kind of selfish attitude that's ruining our community. I'm selfish because I won't mow 5 yards for free every week. I could feel my temper rising. How about you do it if you're so concerned? I have a bad back, the woman sniffed, and I have a full-time job, I shot back. Brenda held up a hand. Mr. Kendrick, if you refuse to participate in community programs, we'll have no choice but to start assessing fines for non-compliance. Fine me for what? I'm in perfect compliance with all the actual bylaws. We'll see about that. Brenda's smile was sharp. I'm sure if we inspect your property closely enough, we'll find violations. Everyone has violations if you look hard enough. The threat hung in the air between us. The other 2 women actually looked uncomfortable, but Brenda's gaze was steady and cold. You know what? I said. I think I need to review the HOA bylaws more carefully, and maybe have my attorney do the same. You're welcome to waste your money on lawyers, Brenda said. But you'll find that the board has full authority to manage community standards as we see fit. After they left, I poured myself a bourbon and sat down with the HOA documents I had received at closing. It took 3 hours of reading through legal language, but several things became clear. First, the bylaws did require participation in community programs, but only those officially voted on and approved by a majority of homeowners. Second, the HOA board had the authority to levy fines, but only for specific violations clearly outlined in the documents. And third, there was a clause about board members not using their positions for personal financial gain. I thought about Brenda pushing her nephew's landscaping service on Mrs. Patterson, and wondered how many other elderly or vulnerable residents had been pressured into expensive contracts. The next morning, I did something I should have done weeks ago. I started talking to my neighbors, not just casual waves and hellos, but actual conversations about the HOA and their experiences with the board. What I discovered was disturbing. Mr. Chen, the man Mrs. Patterson had mentioned, invited me in and showed me the documentation of his fine. His fence was indeed white, but apparently it was eggshell instead of pure white, according to Brenda's inspection. The fine had escalated from $500 to $1,200 because he refused to repaint it. I repainted that fence 2 years ago, he told me, frustrated. It's the same paint I've always used, but suddenly it's not acceptable. Did you pay the fine? I'm fighting it, but the HOA board keeps denying my appeals. They're threatening to put a lien on my house. I visited 6 more neighbors that day. Each had a story. Mrs. Rivera had been fined for a garden gnome that violated decorative item restrictions. The Johnsons were threatened with fines because their teenage son's car was too old and unsightly, even though it was properly registered and parked in their driveway. And old Mr. Foster had been pressured into hiring Brenda's nephew for tree trimming after receiving violation notices about excessive foliage. The pattern was clear. Brenda was using her position to either extract fines or push business to her nephew, probably both. On Friday, exactly 1 week after I had mowed Mrs. Patterson's lawn, Brenda appeared at my door yet again. This time, she handed me a formal letter on HOA letterhead. "This is your official assignment for the Community Volunteer Landscaping Program," she announced. "You're to maintain the yards at these 5 addresses every week. Failure to comply will result in fines starting at $100 per week, escalating by $100 each subsequent week." I scanned the letter. The addresses included Mrs. Patterson and 4 others. "And if I refuse, then you pay the fines, your choice." Brenda crossed her arms. "Honestly, Mr. Kendrick, I don't understand why you're being so difficult. It's just a few hours of your time each week. A few hours I'm not being compensated for, to do work that benefits you and your nephew." Her eyes narrowed. "What exactly are you implying?" "I'm implying that this whole program is a scam. You're either forcing residents to pay your nephew or forcing other residents to do the work for free. Either way, you benefit. That's slander. Mr. Kendrick, I could sue you for that." "Go ahead. Discovery would be interesting." We stared at each other for a long moment. Finally, Brenda smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You have until Monday to complete your first assignment. Clock's ticking." After she left, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to a real estate attorney I had used when purchasing the house. The second was to a friend who worked as an investigative journalist for the Arizona Republic. The attorney, David Marsh, agreed to meet with me on Saturday morning. I brought all my documentation, including the HOA bylaws, Brenda's letter, and notes from my conversations with neighbors. David read through everything carefully, occasionally making notes. Finally, he looked up. "This is problematic on several levels. First, they can't just create a mandatory volunteer program without a proper vote by the membership. Second, if Brenda is directing business to her nephew, that's a clear conflict of interest. Third, some of these fines are excessive and not properly justified under the bylaws. So what are my options? You can fight it, but it'll take time and money. HOA disputes usually have to go through an internal appeal process first, then potentially to court. The process could take months. What if I just refuse to comply and don't pay the fines? They can put a lien on your property and eventually foreclose. I've seen it happen. HOAs have a lot of power in Arizona." I leaned back in my chair. There has to be something I can do. David thought for a moment. Actually, there might be. If you can prove that the board is acting in bad faith or for personal gain, you can call for a special meeting of the membership to vote on removing them. You'd need signatures from 20% of homeowners to trigger it, according to your bylaws. And then what? If enough people vote to remove the board, you can elect a new one. It's not easy, but it's possible. I left David's office with a plan forming. If Brenda wanted a fight, I'd give her one. Monday morning came, and I didn't mow any of the assigned yards. I fully expected Brenda to show up, but she didn't. Instead, I received an email with a formal fine notice, $100 for failure to participate in the community program. I replied with a single line, See you at the appeal hearing. That afternoon, I went door to door through the entire neighborhood. Meadowbrook Heights had 83 homes, which meant I needed signatures from at least 17 homeowners to call a special meeting. I explained what was happening and showed them the documentation I had gathered. The response was overwhelming. People were angry. Many had their own stories of unreasonable fines and harassment. By the end of the week, I had 34 signatures, double what I needed. I submitted the petition to the HOA on Friday, as required by the bylaws. Within hours, Brenda called me. "You're making a huge mistake," she said, her voice tight with anger. "Am I, or am I just exercising my rights as a homeowner? You're going to regret this, I guarantee it." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." She hung up. Saturday morning, I woke up to find my car had been towed from my own driveway. A note on my door cited a violation for unauthorized vehicle storage. My car was properly registered, insured, and parked in my own driveway, exactly where it had been every night for 3 months. I called the towing company. They told me the HOA had authorized the tow and I'd need to pay $300 to retrieve my car. I called the police instead. The officer who responded was a middle-aged man named Sergeant Rodriguez. I explained the situation and showed him the note from the HOA. "Do you have documentation showing you live here and own this vehicle?" he asked. I provided my registration, insurance, and property deed. He examined them carefully. "Your car was legally parked on your own property," he said. "This tow wasn't justified. I'll contact the towing company and have them return your vehicle at no charge." "Can they do that?" "They're required to comply with law enforcement. The HOA doesn't have the authority to override property rights." He made a few notes. "You might also want to file a complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate. They handle HOA violations." I didn't know that was an option. Most people don't. But HOAs are required to follow state law just like everyone else. If they're abusing their authority, the state can investigate and impose sanctions. After he left, I spent the rest of the day researching Arizona HOA law. What I found was enlightening. HOAs were indeed subject to state regulations, and there were specific laws about conflicts of interest, proper procedure for fines, and abuse of authority. If I could prove Brenda had violated these laws, she could face serious consequences, including removal from the board and potential criminal charges. My journalist friend, Marcus, called me that evening. "I've been looking into your HOA president," he said. "Brenda Whitfield, interesting person. How so?" "She's been president of 3 different HOAs in the past 10 years. Each time, she resigned under mysterious circumstances. One of them involved a lawsuit that was settled out of court. Can you find out what the lawsuit was about?" "I'm working on it." "Sealed settlement. So it's tricky. But I have sources." The special meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks out as required by the bylaws. In the meantime, Brenda escalated her campaign against me. I received violation notices for things that weren't actually violations. My mailbox was supposedly tarnished, even though it was newly painted. My grass was too long, even though I had mowed it 2 days before. And my trash cans were visible from the street, even though they were in my garage. Each violation came with a fine. I appealed every single one and refused to pay. Other homeowners who had signed the petition started reporting similar harassment. The Johnsons received a violation for their son's car again. Mrs. Rivera got dinged for a flower pot on her porch. Mr. Chen received another notice about his fence. But something unexpected happened. Instead of intimidating people into backing down, Brenda's tactics made them angrier. More homeowners came forward with their own stories. The petition grew to 53 signatures, nearly 2/3 of the neighborhood. I spent my evenings documenting everything and working with David to prepare for the meeting. We gathered evidence of Brenda's conflict of interest, traced payments from homeowners to her nephew's landscaping company, and compiled testimony from affected residents. Marcus came through with information about the lawsuit. Brenda had been sued by homeowners in her previous HOA for embezzlement. She had allegedly been inflating maintenance costs and pocketing the difference. The case was settled for an undisclosed amount, and Brenda had resigned from the board. "How did she become president of another HOA after that?" I asked. "The settlement included a non-disclosure agreement," Marcus explained. "So when she applied for the board here, there was no public record of the lawsuit." Background checks for HOA board positions are pretty minimal. Armed with this information, I felt confident going into the meeting, but Brenda wasn't done yet. 2 days before the scheduled meeting, I received a certified letter from a law firm representing the HOA. It demanded immediate payment of all outstanding fines, which they claimed now totaled $1,500, plus legal fees of $3,000. If I didn't pay within 5 days, they would initiate foreclosure proceedings on my home. I showed the letter to David. He actually laughed. This is absurd. They can't foreclose over disputed fines. We'll respond and make it clear we're contesting everything. But can they drag this out legally? Make it expensive for me? They can try, but I think they're bluffing. This is a scare tactic. The day before the meeting, Mrs. Patterson called me. She sounded upset. Yates, I just got a visit from Brenda. She told me that if I attend the meeting tomorrow or speak against her, she'll make sure I get fined for every violation she can find. She said she'll force me out of my home. I felt my blood boil. Mrs. Patterson, it's illegal. She can't retaliate against you for exercising your rights. I know, but I'm scared. I can't afford to fight her. I'm on a fixed income. You won't have to fight alone, I promise you. We're going to stop her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about vulnerable people like Mrs. Patterson being bullied by someone who was supposed to serve the community. I thought about all the homeowners being squeezed for money through bogus fines and unnecessary services. The meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the entrance to Meadowbrook Heights. I arrived early to find the parking lot already half full. Apparently, people were taking this seriously. Inside, rows of folding chairs faced a long table where the HOA board sat. Brenda was in the center, flanked by 4 other board members. She watched with a tight smile as residents filed in and took their seats. By the official start time, every chair was full and people were standing along the walls. I counted at least 6 people, maybe more. For a neighborhood of 83 homes, that was an impressive turnout. Brenda called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. Good evening, everyone. We're here because a petition was filed calling for a special meeting to address concerns about board management. Before we begin, I want to remind everyone that this board has worked tirelessly to maintain property values and community standards in Meadowbrook Heights. Several people shifted in their seats. Someone in the back muttered something I couldn't hear. Mr. Kendrick, Brenda continued, looking directly at me. Since you filed the petition, you have the floor to present your concerns. I stood and walked to the front of the room. I had prepared notes, but I decided to speak from the heart instead. Thank you. I moved to Meadowbrook Heights 3 months ago because I thought it would be a good community. A place where neighbors looked out for each other. And you know what? Most of the people here are exactly that. Good neighbors. Kind people. But the HOA board, specifically President Whitfield, has turned this organization into something else entirely, a tool for harassment and personal profit. Brenda's expression darkened. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Kendrick. I hope you have evidence. I do. I pulled out my folder of documentation. Let's start with the so-called volunteer landscaping program. President Whitfield demanded I mow 5 yards every week for free, claiming it was a mandatory community program. But according to our bylaws, such programs require a vote by the membership. Was there ever a vote? Silence. I'll take that as a no. Now let's talk about what happens when residents can't or won't mow these yards themselves. President Whitfield recommends her nephew's landscaping company at inflated rates. Mrs. Patterson, would you like to share what you were quoted? Mrs. Patterson stood shakily. $200 a month for basic lawn care. I called 2 other companies. They quoted me $75. Murmurs ran through the crowd. That's a conflict of interest, I continued. A board member using her position to direct business to a family member. But it gets worse. I've documented at least 15 cases in the past year where homeowners were hit with questionable fines. Fines that just happen to get dropped if they hire the recommended landscaping service. This is slander. Brenda stood abruptly. You have no proof of any wrongdoing. Actually, I do. I pulled out printouts of payment records that several homeowners had provided. Here's Mr. Foster's case. He received a violation notice for tree trimming. 3 days later, he hired the recommended service. The fine was immediately dismissed. Mrs. Chen, same pattern. The Johnsons, same thing. It's almost like the violations are manufactured to create business. The board members beside Brenda were looking uncomfortable now. One of them, a man named Harold, spoke up. "Brenda, is this true? You never mentioned your nephew owned a landscaping company." "It's not relevant," Brenda snapped. "Actually, it's very relevant," David said, standing from where he had been sitting in the back. "I'm David Marsh, an attorney representing Mr. Kendrick and several other homeowners. Under Arizona law, HOA board members must disclose any conflicts of interest. Failing to do so is a violation of state regulations. Additionally, using HOA authority to benefit financially from homeowners is potential fraud." The room erupted in conversation. People were angry, shouting questions at Brenda. She tried to gavel the meeting back to order, but no one was paying attention. Furthermore, David raised his voice to be heard. "We've discovered that President Whitfield was involved in a lawsuit at her previous HOA, a lawsuit involving financial misconduct. She settled out of court and resigned. These are matters of public concern that should have been disclosed when she ran for the board." Brenda's face had gone pale, then red. "That lawsuit was sealed. You have no right to bring it up." "The existence of the lawsuit is public record," David corrected, "and it's relevant to your fitness to serve on this board." Another board member, a woman named Susan, stood. "I had no idea about any of this, Brenda. You need to answer these allegations." "I don't have to answer anything," Brenda said. "This is a witch hunt orchestrated by a troublemaker who's been here 3 months and thinks he can tell us how to run things." "I'm not telling you how to run things," I said. "I'm asking you to follow the law and the bylaws you're supposed to be enforcing." An elderly man near the front stood. "I've lived here for 15 years. This used to be a nice place. But in the past 2 years under Brenda's leadership, I've seen more fines and more complaints than the previous 10 years combined. I think it's time for a change." "Agreed," someone else called out. "I move that we vote to remove the current board and elect new members," Mr. Chen said. "I second that motion," Mrs. Patterson added. Brenda looked panicked. "That's not how this works. You can't just remove the board." "Actually, we can," David said. "According to Section 19 of the bylaws, a 2/3 vote of members present at a special meeting can remove board members for cause. And I think we've established cause." Susan grabbed the gavel from Brenda. "All in favor of removing the current board and holding new elections, say aye." The response was thunderous. Nearly everyone in the room shouted aye. "Opposed?" Brenda and one other board member said nay. The other 3 board members abstained. "The motion carries," Susan said. She turned to Brenda. "I'm sorry, Brenda, but you're out." Brenda grabbed her purse and papers. "You'll regret this. I'll sue every single one of you." "Good luck with that," David said, "especially once we file our complaint with the Arizona Department of Real Estate and refer the matter to local law enforcement for investigation of fraud." Brenda stormed out, the door slamming behind her. The room sat in stunned silence for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in until the entire room was applauding. The rest of the meeting was spent organizing interim leadership and planning proper elections. Susan agreed to serve as temporary president until elections could be held the following month. One of the first acts was to suspend all outstanding fines pending review. After the meeting, people came up to thank me and shake my hand. Mrs. Patterson hugged me. "You did a wonderful thing," she said. "You stood up when the rest of us were too afraid." "You stood up too," I reminded her. "We all did this together." Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. David helped us file a formal complaint with the state, which launched an investigation into Brenda's conduct. The new interim board hired an independent auditor to review the HOA's finances. What they found was worse than expected. Brenda had been inflating maintenance costs and pocketing the difference, just like in her previous HOA. Over 2 years, she had embezzled nearly $40,000 from the HOA accounts. She had also been receiving kickbacks from her nephew for referrals, though proving that part was harder. The HOA filed a lawsuit against Brenda for the embezzled funds. She countersued for defamation and wrongful removal, but her case was weak. Her attorney eventually advised her to settle. Meanwhile, Marcus published an article in the Arizona Republic about HOA abuse and used Meadowbrook Heights as a case study. The article sparked a broader conversation about HOA oversight and accountability. State legislators even began discussing reforms to strengthen protections for homeowners. The elections for the new board were held 6 weeks after the special meeting. I didn't run for a position myself, but I helped campaign for candidates who shared the vision of an HOA that served homeowners rather than exploited them. Susan ran for president and won overwhelmingly. Mr. Chen and Mrs. Rivera also won seats. One of the new board's first actions was to revise the fine structure to make it more reasonable and create an independent appeals process. They also implemented a rule requiring disclosure of any conflicts of interest and prohibiting board members from benefiting financially from HOA decisions. The volunteer landscaping program was officially disbanded. Instead, the board created an actual volunteer network where neighbors could sign up to help elderly or disabled residents as they were able. It was optional, flexible, and actually served the community rather than exploiting it. 3 months after the special meeting, I was in my backyard working on a deck project when Mrs. Patterson called out from her yard. "Yates, come over here, dear. I want to show you something." I walked over to find her standing in her garden, which was bursting with colorful flowers. She was moving much better now, her hip fully healed. "Look at this," she said proudly, gesturing to a new rose bush. "I planted it this morning. First time I've been able to garden since the surgery." "It's beautiful," I said. "You did a great job. I wanted to thank you again, not just for helping with my yard, but for everything. You gave us our community back. I just did what anyone should have done. But you actually did it. That's the difference." We stood there for a moment, enjoying the late afternoon sun and the peaceful quiet of the neighborhood. "Oh, I almost forgot," Mrs. Patterson said. "I made lemonade. Want some?" I smiled. "I'd love some." As we sat on her patio drinking lemonade and talking about her garden plans, I reflected on how much had changed in just a few months. I had moved to Meadowbrook Heights looking for a quiet place to live and work. Instead, I had found myself in the middle of a battle against corruption and abuse of power. But I had also found something else, a real community, not the artificial, rule-bound version Brenda had tried to impose, but a genuine neighborhood where people looked out for each other. The legal battle with Brenda dragged on for several more months. She eventually settled, agreeing to repay the embezzled funds and drop her countersuit. The state investigation resulted in sanctions and barred her from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. Her nephew's landscaping company also faced scrutiny, though he claimed ignorance of his aunt's schemes. Some people questioned whether it was all worth it. The legal fees, the time and stress, the conflict. My answer was always the same: absolutely. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't really about me or even about Brenda. It was about the principle that HOAs are supposed to serve homeowners, not the other way around. It was about standing up to bullies and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. One Saturday morning, about 6 months after everything started, I was mowing my lawn when I noticed someone new moving into the house across the street. A young couple with a baby were unloading boxes from a moving truck. I finished my section, then walked over to introduce myself. "Welcome to Meadowbrook Heights," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Yates Kendrick." The man shook my hand. "Thanks, I'm Derek, and this is my wife, Angela. How are you liking the neighborhood so far?" "It seems great," Angela said. "Everyone's been really friendly. We actually heard about this place from a friend who said it was one of the best-run HOAs in Scottsdale." I couldn't help but smile. It is now, though that's a fairly recent development. "Oh, really? Long story. But if you ever have any questions or concerns about the HOA, don't hesitate to reach out. We've got a good board now, but it's important for homeowners to stay involved and informed." Derek nodded. "Good to know. Hey, would you mind if I grabbed your number? Just in case we need advice on neighborhood stuff?" "Sure thing." We exchanged contact information, and I helped them carry a few boxes inside before heading back to finish my lawn. As I pushed the mower across my grass, I thought about how different things could have been. If I had just complied with Brenda's demands, mowed those 5 yards every week, kept my head down, and avoided conflict, it would have been easier in the short term. But Mrs. Patterson would still be facing financial pressure. Other vulnerable residents would still be exploited. And Brenda would have continued her schemes unchecked, embezzling money and abusing her authority. Sometimes the easy path isn't the right path. The incident with the property map that Brenda had demanded I show her had come during one of her visits. She had claimed that part of Mrs. Patterson's yard was actually common area that I was responsible for maintaining. I had pulled up the official property survey I received at closing and showed her the clear boundary lines. Mrs. Patterson's property ended at her fence line, nowhere near my yard. Brenda had stood there, staring at the map, unable to argue with documented facts. I had simply walked away, leaving her sputtering on my driveway. That moment crystallized everything. Brenda's demands were baseless. Her authority was fraudulent, and the only power she had was what people gave her through fear and compliance. I thought about that moment often in the months that followed, how empowering it felt to simply say no, to show the facts, and walk away. It wasn't dramatic or aggressive, it was just calm assertion of truth. The HOA newsletter, which had been a monthly list of violations and warnings under Brenda, transformed into an actual community bulletin. It featured neighbor profiles, local events, gardening tips, and genuine community news. Susan ran it with a light touch, focusing on bringing people together rather than keeping them in line. The neighborhood itself changed too. People started talking to each other more. Block parties became regular events. Kids played in the streets again without parents worrying about violation notices for chalk drawings or misplaced toys. Mr. Chen became one of my closest friends. We discovered a shared love of woodworking and started collaborating on projects. He helped me build a workshop in my garage, and I helped him restore an antique desk for his wife. The Johnson's son graduated high school and got accepted to Arizona State University. They threw a party and invited the whole neighborhood. Brenda never would have allowed such a gathering under her reign, claiming it violated noise ordinances. Mrs. Rivera expanded her garden and started a neighborhood plant exchange. Once a month, people would gather in the community center with cuttings, seeds, and starter plants to trade. It became one of the most popular events in Meadowbrook Heights, and Mrs. Patterson became something of a neighborhood grandmother. Her home was always open, her lemonade always cold, and her advice always welcome. She organized a weekly coffee gathering for retirees in the community, giving them a chance to socialize and support each other. I continued to help her with heavy yard work occasionally, but as she regained her strength, she mostly handled it herself. She took pride in her garden and loved showing off new additions. As for me, I settled into the rhythm of the neighborhood. My software development work continued to go well, and I found I was more productive in this environment of genuine community than I had been in my previous apartment. I started dating someone I met through the neighborhood, actually. Rebecca Norton worked as a physical therapist and had recently moved into a house on the next street over. We met at one of the block parties and hit it off immediately. She had heard about the HOA situation and said my willingness to stand up for the community was one of the things that attracted her to me. Life wasn't perfect, of course. The HOA still had to deal with occasional disputes and legitimate violations. But the new board handled things with common sense and fairness rather than using rules as weapons. There was one particularly satisfying moment about a year after everything went down. I was at the hardware store in Scottsdale when I ran into Brenda in the paint aisle. She saw me and immediately turned to leave, but I called out to her, "Brenda, wait." She stopped but didn't turn around. "I just want you to know that I don't harbor any ill will toward you," I said. "I hope you've learned from what happened and that you're doing better." She finally turned, and I was surprised to see tears in her eyes. "I lost everything because of you, my reputation, my position, my relationships in this community. You lost those things because of your own choices," I said gently. "The embezzlement, the conflicts of interest, the abuse of power, those were your decisions. I needed that money," she said quietly. "My husband left me with massive debt. I was desperate. I understand desperation. But stealing from your neighbors wasn't the answer. There were other options, legal options, that you could have pursued. I know." She wiped her eyes. "I know that now. I've been in therapy, working through it all. I just want you to know that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." I studied her for a moment, trying to gauge her sincerity. She seemed genuinely remorseful, but I also knew that people often regretted getting caught more than they regretted their actions. "I accept your apology," I finally said. "I hope you find a better path forward." She nodded and quickly left the store. I stood there for a moment, processing the encounter. I had spent months being angry at Brenda, seeing her as a villain who needed to be defeated. But seeing her broken and apologetic reminded me that she was human too, flawed and struggling like everyone else. That didn't excuse what she had done, but it provided some closure. The fight had never really been about destroying Brenda personally. It had been about protecting the community and establishing proper boundaries and accountability. Rebecca and I got serious pretty quickly. About 18 months after we started dating, I proposed. We decided to have the wedding reception at the Meadowbrook Heights Community Center. Mrs. Patterson helped organize it, and nearly the whole neighborhood attended. During the reception, Susan gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes. When Yates moved into our neighborhood, I don't think any of us realized what an impact he would have. He could have kept his head down, ignored the problems, and lived his life in peace. Instead, he stood up for what was right. He reminded us that we have power as homeowners, as community members, as citizens. He showed us that one person really can make a difference. Meadowbrook Heights is a better place because Yates had the courage to care. So here's to Yates and Rebecca. May your marriage be filled with the same courage, integrity, and love that you've both shown to this community. The room erupted in applause. Rebecca squeezed my hand and whispered, "You really did change everything, didn't you?" "We changed everything," I corrected. "All of us together." And that was the truth. Yes, I had filed the petition and organized the effort, but dozens of neighbors had stood with me. They had shared their stories, signed the petition, attended the meeting, and voted for change. It was a collective action, a community deciding together that they deserved better. The following year, Susan decided not to run for re-election as HOA president. She had done an excellent job stabilizing things and rebuilding trust, but she wanted to focus on other priorities. Mr. Chen ran for the position and won. One of his first initiatives was creating a community emergency fund to help homeowners facing financial hardship. The fund was voluntary, supported by donations rather than mandatory fees. It could be used for things like helping elderly residents with essential home repairs or supporting families dealing with medical crises. The idea was inspired by Mrs. Patterson's situation and the recognition that financial vulnerability shouldn't make someone a target for exploitation. It should make them a priority for community support. The fund helped several families over the years. When the Martinez family's house was damaged in a fire, the fund helped cover their temporary housing while insurance sorted everything out. When Mr. Foster needed expensive medical treatment, the fund helped with his HOA dues while he recovered. It was the kind of thing an HOA should do, strengthen the community and support its members. Rebecca and I bought Mrs. Patterson's house when she decided to move into an assisted living facility. It was a bittersweet transition. She was ready for the move and excited about the social opportunities at the facility, but it was hard to say goodbye to the home where she had lived for over 20 years. We promised to maintain her garden and keep her updated on neighborhood news. She made us promise to continue the lemonade tradition, especially in summer. Living in her house, surrounded by the garden she had lovingly tended, felt like inheriting a legacy. Not just the physical property, but the values she represented: kindness, resilience, and genuine care for neighbors. By that point, the whole HOA drama felt like ancient history. New residents moving in often had no idea about the battles that had been fought to create the community they were joining. In a way, that was the goal, to create a normal, functional HOA where people could just live their lives without fear or exploitation. But I made sure the lessons weren't forgotten. When I was asked to serve on the board myself, I accepted. I wanted to help maintain the culture we had built and prevent any slide back toward the old ways. During my tenure on the board, we codified many of the informal practices into official policies: transparency in finances, clear appeals processes, mandatory disclosure of conflicts of interest, and reasonable, proportionate enforcement of rules. We also created a mentorship program where longtime residents could welcome new homeowners and explain how the HOA worked. It helped new residents feel connected and informed from the start. One afternoon, about 5 years after I had first moved to Meadowbrook Heights, I was trimming the hedges in what was now my yard when a car pulled up. A woman got out and approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm looking for Yates Kendrick. Does he live here?" That's me, I said, setting down the hedge trimmer. Can I help you? I hope so. My name is Patricia Morrison. I'm dealing with an HOA situation in my neighborhood in Phoenix, and someone told me you might have advice. I invited her to sit on the patio and brought out lemonade just like Mrs. Patterson used to do. Patricia explained that her HOA president was pressuring residents to use a specific contractor for home repairs and hitting people with violation notices if they didn't comply. It sounded depressingly familiar. I spent an hour talking her through what I had learned, document everything, talk to neighbors, understand the bylaws, know your legal rights, and don't be afraid to stand up for what's right. The key is organization, I told her. HOA boards have power because they're organized and homeowners aren't. When homeowners organize, the balance shifts. Patricia left with pages of notes and a determined expression. She emailed me a few months later to let me know they had successfully removed their board and elected new leadership. Her email ended with a line that stuck with me. You inspired us to believe that change was possible. Thank you for showing us how. I realized then that the impact of what we had done in Meadowbrook Heights extended beyond our neighborhood. We had created a template that others could follow, proof that homeowners didn't have to accept abuse and corruption. Marcus ended up writing a follow-up article about HOA reform movements across Arizona, featuring several communities that had successfully challenged problematic boards. The article helped spark legislative changes that strengthened homeowner protections and increased oversight of HOA operations. It wasn't a complete solution. Corruption and abuse still happened in HOAs across the country, but it was progress. It was proof that ordinary people could push back against institutional problems and create meaningful change. Rebecca and I eventually started a family. Our daughter was born on a cool October morning, and we named her Patricia, partly after Mrs. Patterson and partly after Patricia Morrison, both women who had shown me different aspects of community and courage. Raising a child in Meadowbrook Heights reinforced why the fight had been worth it. I wanted my daughter to grow up in a community built on fairness and mutual respect, not fear and exploitation. I wanted her to see neighbors helping each other because they cared, not because they were forced to. The neighborhood kids played together in yards and common areas, without parents worrying about violation notices. The community center hosted activities for all ages. The annual block party became a highlight of the year, with everyone contributing food, music, and games. It was the kind of neighborhood people saw in movies and thought didn't exist anymore. But it did exist because we had fought to create it. Mrs. Patterson passed away peacefully in her sleep at the assisted living facility when she was 88. The neighborhood held a memorial service in the community center, and it was standing room only. Person after person shared stories of her kindness, wisdom, and strength. When it was my turn to speak, I talked about how she had been the first person to really welcome me to the neighborhood, how she had shown me what genuine community looked like, how her vulnerability in the face of Brenda's pressure had motivated me to act. Mrs. Patterson believed that neighbors should look out for each other, I said. Not because a rule book says so, but because that's what good people do. She lived that belief every day, and she taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply be kind and ask for help when you need it. Her legacy lives on in this community that we've built together. After the service, people gathered in small groups, sharing memories and supporting each other. It struck me how far we had come from the days when neighbors barely knew each other, united only by fear of HOA violations. Now we were a genuine community, bound by relationships and shared values. We celebrated together, grieved together, and supported each other through good times and bad. That was what an HOA should enable, not prevent. As years passed, I occasionally looked back on that morning when Brenda had first knocked on my door, demanding I mow 5 yards every week. I thought about how easily I could have given in, avoided conflict, and just done what she asked. I thought about the property map I had shown her, the simple act of presenting facts and walking away. That moment had been the beginning of everything, the first time I had drawn a line and refused to be pushed around. It seemed like such a small thing at the time, but small things matter. Small acts of resistance, small assertions of rights, small stands for principle. They add up, they inspire others, they create change. If I could go back and give advice to my younger self, standing on that porch with coffee in hand, facing down an HOA president who thought she had all the power, I would say, trust your instincts, know your rights, document everything, and never underestimate the power of community. I would tell him that the fight ahead would be difficult but absolutely worth it. That standing up to bullies and corruption is never easy, but it's always important. That one person really can make a difference, especially when they inspire others to stand with them. And I would tell him to make sure Mrs. Patterson knew how much she meant to the neighborhood, because time is precious and gratitude shouldn't wait. But mostly, I would tell him to show Brenda that property map and walk away. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to accept someone else's version of reality, present the truth, and let it speak for itself. Meadowbrook Heights thrived in the years that followed. Property values increased, not because of strict enforcement of petty rules, but because people genuinely wanted to live in a well-managed community. The neighborhood developed a reputation as one of the best places to live in Scottsdale. New residents often commented on how friendly and welcoming everyone was. They appreciated the reasonable HOA that maintained standards without harassment. They loved the community events and the sense of belonging. Most of them never knew about the battles that had created this environment. They didn't need to know the details. They just needed to enjoy the benefits and help maintain the culture. But for those of us who had been there, who had fought and struggled and refused to give up, the memory remained vivid. We knew that good communities don't just happen. They're created by people who care enough to stand up for what's right, and we knew that vigilance was necessary. Power can corrupt, and even good HOA boards need oversight and accountability. So we stayed involved, attended meetings, asked questions, and made sure history didn't repeat itself. Years later, sitting on my patio on a summer evening, watching my daughter play in the yard that used to belong to Mrs. Patterson, I felt a deep sense of contentment. Not because everything was perfect, life never is, but because I knew I had done the right thing. I had stood up when it mattered. I had helped protect vulnerable people. I had inspired a community to reclaim its power, and in doing so, I had created a better place for my family and neighbors to live. The whole journey started with a simple demand from an HOA president who thought she could bully me into submission. It ended with a transformed community, legislative change, and a model for others facing similar struggles. All because I showed her a property map and walked away. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of defiance. Sometimes standing your ground is the most radical thing you can do. And sometimes the best way to win is simply to refuse to play by someone else's rules. Brenda had expected compliance. She had expected fear. She had expected me to back down like everyone else had. Instead, she got facts, resistance, and a community that finally said enough. That made all the difference. As the sun set over Meadowbrook Heights, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, I raised my glass of lemonade in a silent toast to Mrs. Patterson. To all the neighbors who had stood with me, and to the simple truth that people united by common purpose are stronger than any bully with a gavel and a grudge. The fight had been worth it. Every difficult conversation, every tense meeting, every hour spent documenting and organizing and pushing for change. Because at the end of the day, we hadn't just defeated a corrupt HOA president. We had built something better. We had created a community worth living in. And that was a victory that would last for generations.